If the pandemic was good at reminding us of just one thing, and I think it did a great deal more than that, and is still doing that, but high level, one thing, just one big takeaway. Here's the lesson of the past 3 years. Humans plan, God laughs. How many of our plans were canceled, leveled, rewritten, reimagined, lost, grieved, changed? How many since March of 2020? Personally, I've lost count. And whether it's low-level malaise or actual adjustment to chronic disappointment, I'm actually somehow much better at this than I was 3 years ago. Nearly 3 years into having plans and strategies that get scrapped at the 11th hour only to be reworked the very next day and reworked the day after that and then scrapped again and then rebooked and rescheduled and then scrapped again, I've gained a bit of muscle, a bit of flexibility, an adaptation to chaos that is all around us. I imagine you have too. It's not that I'm not still planning and dreaming, scheming and strategizing. It's just that I've become all too accustomed to it all going up in smoke and to having to start again and again and again. I've learned through this that the people we dream with, the people we scheme with, it's the people that are more important than the dreams and schemes themselves. Because when the plans go out the window, it's the people around us that pick up where we left off and dream a new dream with us. Maybe you can think of a few members of your own communities that do this with you too. So many people I know right now are talking about this month, this first month of the new year, and how it has again felt like something has shifted. When we returned from summer last year, there was a mood of cautiousness, but also of optimism. We felt this across the city. We began taking off masks and refused to give up the socialization we'd done outside or in sidewalk restaurants all summer as we started moving back inside. We were worried that this December would be like last December and another great wave might come at us. But we held our collective breath and we soldiered on. Some of us got sick, some of us didn't. Some of us took off masks, some of us didn't. We had to grapple with our own sense of mask diversity in a new way and of what we thought of people who had different personal practice than we did. It was a tentative season this past fall leading up to this Christmas, but as everything is, it was only a season. And here in January, there's something new in the air. Subway ridership is up. More people are in offices, some happily, some very much less so, and life is getting bolder. Bolder. It's a time of active forgetting, and for some folks trying to move on, and some folks trying to go back, while some still other folks are still holding their breath. There's something new in the air this month, and when I remember to pay attention to it, I can find it a little unsettling. Unsettled feels very much of where our world is right now. It's been the least snowiest winter in nearly history. And we're about to set a record in New York for both the latest measurable snowfall, we haven't had one yet, and the longest stretch between snowfalls, between when it last snowed last year and when it will first snow this year. This month, and let's note that it's not over yet, has had 40 mass shootings in our country. 40 mass shootings. Mass shootings are defined as more than 4 victims in less than 28 days. Now, I say this in all seriousness and with great respect for those who have different opinions on the Second Amendment than I do. But what's wrong with us? No other country in the world suffers from our addiction to guns like we do. It's quite literally ruining us. And this disease is infecting our children. The 6-year-old who shot his teacher isn't included in the 40 that I just mentioned, but this one incident of an innocent child that stands out to me as unsettling amidst a sea of unsettling. And then there's this footage of Tyre Nichols pulled over and beaten and chased and then beaten again to his death by 5 Memphis police officers whose job was to maintain the peace. We still don't even know why he was pulled over in the first place. But we know he's dead. We don't know why his pleas to stop were ignored. But they weren't. By our officers. We don't know what the devil got into those 5 officers that day, but it will take more than our prayers to excise the demons of brutality out of our police forces. The list of unsettling things in our country and even closer to home could go on, but the point is, I believe none of us need it to. We know this list. We can feel it. There's something unsettling even as we move into this new year. Let's talk more locally, very, very locally. As you know, it is the very human wisdom of the very, very human collegiate church that has gotten us into a bit of hot water of late. Last spring, we all gathered as the congregation planted and growing at West End to lay out where we are and a bit of how we got here, and more importantly, how we would go forward. In just a little while today, we will again gather as this congregation to hear an update on our progress toward our own sustainability. And as we do, for those of you who decide to stay, I'll invite you to listen not just with your human intellect, with all of our human questions and anxieties and needing to sound smart, but to listen more deeply for what God might be doing even in the midst of all of our planning. For planning we are doing. If there's one thing our wonderful real estate team and our crackerjack task force and your incredibly dedicated consistory have learned in these seasons, is that nothing will be settled until it will be settled. There are plans and other plans and discussion about what to do when those plans need to change, and yet there is a plan, and then there's another plan, and how it will continue to change, and how it will change us. And that's the exciting part. Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? Has not God laughed when we have planned? Has not God said, "Come, I will show you still another way home"? Has not God provided manna in the wilderness and all that we need even this day? The Apostle Paul, writing to the disciples he was trying to pastor in Corinth, we hear his words this morning from Lynn, reminds us and them of a divine plan that subverts all our attempts and holds all of our failure. And Paul also writes that God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. This is a quote from Paul. This phrase has been a refrain for me this week. I've been thinking about it and laughing with it. For when we think of God, we don't think of God being foolish or weak, do we? We think of God as wise and strong, right? Immortal, invisible, God only wise. Little ones, to him belong. We are weak, but God is strong. We know these songs from our childhood and from our church. The wisdom and strength of God are bedrock of so much of our faith. They are the first attributes of the holy we're taught. And they're also the last attributes that many of us cling to as we face that veil that separates us from this world and the next. God's got the whole world in his hands. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. But these great hymns of our theology are not what Paul's talking about here. Here, Paul is talking about God's foolishness and God's weakness. What do you suppose those are? What's God's Achilles heel? How does God laugh? How does God tease or tickle or poke fun at? What are these attributes of God that perhaps make God a little more, well, likable? The kind of God you might want to talk to at a cocktail party. A little less holier than thou, or maybe a little more. Good mental health isn't about never being nervous or depressed or anxious. It's about naming when you are and working through accepting it. Good spiritual health isn't about unfailing faith or never questioning God's existence or never asking some version of why do good things happen to bad people. It's about knowing that questions are how we come to answers. Good organizational or communal or maybe even national health isn't about what we think about ourselves and our own wisdom and our strength, but perhaps looking to God for ways to take ourselves a little less seriously, which might lead to maybe treating our neighbor a little more kindly. We like to think we have all the answers, don't we? We don't. We might think we have wisdom and smarts. We might. We might think we're very seriously addressing the problems, of working our plans, and of we're going to solve this. What if we took the problems a little more lightly and let God's foolishness rather than God's strength lead us? What if we let God's sense of play into our strategy? What if we let God's laughter guide us as much as God's staff? In the text we heard this morning, perhaps the text that we live and breathe all around us these days, we hear attributes of God that surprise us. No one expects a foolish or a weak God, but there it is, right there in the text. And divine folly is still somehow stronger, always stronger, and wiser than our best attempts. We make mistakes. We have big hopes and dreams. We're working for the future, and this is serious work, and it should be. But if you listen in the midst, you may hear God smiling and inviting us all to laugh a little bit more with her. I mentioned earlier about relationships being paramount to the plans and the dreams themselves. It's these relationships, the ones with your spouse or your colleagues, the ones here in church or on committees, the one with God, that will carry us through aborted plans, to changed minds, to revision upon revision, and ultimately, these relationships with one another and with God will lead us to a place that is much like a green pasture beside still waters, a place where God is in charge, and where all we have to do, simple as it sounds, hard as it is follow.